Can a lover go but to the land of his beloved? And what seeker findeth rest away from his heart's desire?
In those early years, because up until now he was not yet a Baha'i. This, this youth who was destined to become one of the most brilliant architects in Canada did not fully grasp the implications of this union with one who had been among the first pilgrims to the prison of Akka, who at that time had dedicated her life to the service of the cause, and to whom the master had said, I have accepted you as my own daughter. Anyway, so um, so at this point, she was really torn because she was feeling very guilty about leaving Paris and all her friends, and she knew that Thomas Breckell was dying, and she wrote to Abdu'l-Baha about it. And, tu peux faire la porte de Violette, c'est le son, là, m'embête. She was also missing Paris because she realized that there's some things that she could have done that because she wasn't there couldn't do. And that was the story of Lua Getzinger. Because Lua Getzinger, sorry, Alex is coming in. Lua Getzinger had a mission to try to meet with the Shah of Iran to basically stop the persecutions of Baha'is and hopefully get Abdu'l-Baha released from Akka. So, so she wished she had done that because she wrote her, she says, I came to Paris, dear, writing to her, of course, to see the Shah of Persia, and after much trouble and difficulty, I accomplished all of that. I obtained an audience with him after presenting a petition to the Grand Vizier, which he accepted. Anyway, the point is, we know the story that she accomplished that task on behalf of Abdu'l-Baha, and that was in Paris, and she wasn't there, so she is like that's her city, and yet she had to get sort of used to creating a new community in North America. Now, you've seen this martyrdom business. Thomas Breckell kept saying that he wished for martyrdom, and most of these Baha'i ladies, I guess they were so close to Abdu'l-Baha that they talked about martyrdom all the time. It's like they really prayed for it. And they felt that that's how you can prove your love for the faith. So she writes to Agnes Alexander, whom she taught the faith. And she says, again, Agnes, my precious, let me tell you in a few words about things which have befallen this poor one in all these months when I have not written to you. Some 6 months ago, our adored master, Ruhi Fida, sent me a holy tablet commanding me to go home to America and to marry the man to whom I was engaged, owing no doubt to the hardness of my heart and stubbornness of my will. The effect of his words was as a strong wind which uprooted the tree of my being, and I became weak and ill and suffered many things. Mr. Maxwell were married in haste in London, very ill. It was a deep cup of suffering which our Heavenly Father gave me to drink, and the light and joy and blessing which were hidden at the bottom of the cup were truly great and wonderful. And then she quotes Baha'u'llah, in calamity is my providence, in appearance it is fire and vengeance, in reality it is light and mercy. So anyway, so Canada, I mean, when you read the story, there's the 2-3 major moments for me that are important in Canada. She tried to teach as much as she could. Her husband was really not yet a believer, and she was trying to do everything she could in her writing, in her notes, in talking to have him become Baha'i. She just fought hard and wrote a lot. And he was a great architect. He just loved art. He was very good at everything, and he was a major figure in Canada. And with his brother, they built a great reputation in Canada. Anyway, but she was adamant, and she was after him. So, and they kept moving from place to place, and she was not really much liked, I don't believe, by her in-laws. They were not really that interested in the faith and all that. So she didn't feel quite at ease. And because of her health, and Abdu'l-Baha advised her to go back to New York to see her mother in winter, so she would go back and forth, and she was very ill and all that. And she tried to do the best she could. And they kept changing homes until at one point he built the famous house that where Abdu'l-Baha came and visited and stayed there, of course. And that became, as you know, the Baha'i shrine in North America. Anyway, so those early years were basically moving from place to place and until they could eventually find their own place. So, and she just also didn't have any friends among the people that her husband was working with. They were all rich people, the wealthy wives of stockbrokers and railway magnates, these daughters of flour, paint, and hardware empires. Anyway, she just didn't fit in any of this stuff. Plus, they spoke a French that she wasn't used to. She spoke French from France, and this was Quebecois. So another problem. Anyway, so she's trying to teach, right? And she even taught close members of the family of her husband. And she's always in touch with the World Center, with Abdu'l-Baha, and with the greatest holy leaf that kept writing to her. I mean, she has received so many letters from Abdu'l-Baha that it's just amazing. And he just loved her so much. So let me just skip a little bit here. So, Sutherland was just a believer in art and in work. He just couldn't she couldn't quite get him to accept the faith. So at one point, I have to just, there's so many details I cannot. So I think her mother passed away, May's mother. And she believes that her mother, who was very distant at the beginning, eventually recognized the faith. So, that's her belief. And Lua, who wrote her about her mother, said, "Truly, I think she's one of the finest characters I have ever met, and I'm so glad I know the real true Mrs. Bowles, and I shall always know her from now on. I think I shall never forget her love and kindness to us. She shows forth the deeds of a believer, whether she says she is or is not." Now, Abdu'l-Baha, before her death, Abdu'l-Baha had written a tablet to Mrs. Bowles, which was translated in June 1905. See, and whenever Abdu'l-Baha, I noticed, writes to the mother of May Maxwell or writes to her husband, Sutherland Maxwell, always he talks about May Maxwell and how precious she is. There's no way around it. I mean, trying to express to them that if they are basically any good, it's because of her. So this letter was written by Abdu'l-Baha, and I'm going to read it. O thou maidservant of God, this is addressed to the mother. I perused the letter which thou didst dictate in a state of illness and sickness, and which was written down by the attracted maidservant of God, Mrs. Maxwell. Its contents were the cause of rejoicing, inasmuch as they described the services rendered unto thee by thy dear daughter. Daughters, addressing that to Violetta and to all the daughters I see here, daughters must render the utmost service to their mothers and must ever be the cause of their joy and happiness. You can all write it down, you can quote, you can pin it in your, it's really so nice. Now see, he's talking to the mother, but he's talking about her daughter. And must ever be the cause of their happiness. I beg of God to assist her in that which will enable her to become a healer of the spirit and a minister to the spiritually sick, and that she may day by day deepen thy conviction, that thine assurance and trust in God may grow. O thou maidservant of God, thank thou the true one, for God hath given thee such a pure and noble daughter. See, again, who hath turned her heart to God, is guided by the light of guidance, and is attracted by the heavenly fragrances. She is engaged night and day in guiding others, so that she may illumine those who are in darkness, impart knowledge to the ignorant, give sight to the blind, and bestow the power of guidance to the helpless. Rejoice and gladden thy esteemed daughter on my behalf with wondrous Abha greetings. Anyway, so we must assume that she basically accepted finally Abdu'l-Baha. So Abdu'l-Baha often told an interesting story about her parents. At this time, a story she repeated in her formal talks as well as in private conversation. It concerned a great test which both of them faced not long after their marriage. It must have been sometime in the early years of their marital life, as they were seated together in their home. Sutherland had apparently turned to his wife and said, "You are involved more and more in your Baha'i work, and I, in my professional work, we are drifting apart." According to Abdu'l-Baha, her mother was terrified at what these words implied. She was sorely tempted to rush forward and reassure her husband that from now on she would do as she wished. That was what a wife was supposed to do. That was what society expected her to do. But she steeled herself. She gently reminded him that before marrying him, she had told him that the cause of God would always come first in her life. She had warned him of her priorities. Then she quietly added, "If I must, then I will go on this chosen path in my life. If I must, then I will go alone on this chosen path in my life." Sutherland was silent for some moments and then reached out and took her hands in his own. And he said, "I will go with you all the way." Rehanum recalled her mother saying that this moment was a turning point in her father's spiritual life. Maya was convinced that her firm response to this remark was one of the reasons for Sutherland's recognition of the faith. By taking this stand, she brought him, as it were, to critical crossroads he had to choose. And so the question is, how did he become a Baha'i? I mean, see, he was getting closer and closer, but it was not that clear. But then we learned that he became a Baha'i in 1904. And so we didn't know how that happened. And so when he was asked years later by Marion Hoffman, asked him, when did you declare? Because they said that it was 1904, and May Maxwell made sure that she wrote William Sutherland Maxwell became a Baha'i in 1904, and she wrote it in a beautifully bound red and black leather daily memorandum book for 1870, tooled in gold, which belonged to her father. She wrote that. He responded to the question of how. He says, I guess it was in 1902, 1903. He said, we had no stopwatch or timetable. He said, I was not emotional about it. My reason recognized that this was it. That's his answer. It's no emotion. I just realized this is it. And it's the it that made him become a Baha'i. So this is 1903, 1904. So let's skip to some of the more interesting things. Now, of course, life is a bit different now because he's going to become extremely active. He's going to be part of the local assembly, and a lot of things are going to happen in his life. There's so many sections, so many things to say. The master knew that the Baha'i teachings would take root and flourish in Canada because of May. He was fully aware that her home was a beacon of spiritual light and was destined to become the center of Baha'i activity in that country, as well as the US. She symbolized the standards of the kingdom in that continent. And the following winter, she wrote to Sutherland something. She said, I went to, she was traveling back and forth to New York. She said, I went to Juliet's to see the new year in with her with prayers and tablets, and in the quiet studio, while all New York was in uproar, we felt the love and peace of God descend, and for a while it seemed that we were in the presence of a beloved one in Akka. Brother had gone to a party at the florist, so he called for me at 12:15, and we saw the gay crowds on Broadway, confetti, flying horns blowing, parties in automobiles, ringing huge bells, perfect bedlam. And and she would be going back and forth, and he spent all his time working, because he had so much work to do. He couldn't. And she was trying to find a way to go back to pilgrimage with him, and he couldn't really spare the time. And I think at one point she wrote to Abdu'l-Baha, and he told her to just wait a little bit because that was a bad time when conditions were not very good for him for his imprisonment. So Abdu'l-Baha wrote to him, to Mr. Maxwell, says, O thou who hast turned thy face toward the kingdom, although delay has occurred in writing, I can now answer thee. Couldst thou but realize with what love and attraction this letter is being written, undoubtedly thou wouldst soar on the wings of joy and happiness toward the pinnacle of glory, begin to sing and chant and pour forth such a melody as to exhilarate and stir up the entire dominion of Canada. The respected wife, Mrs. Maxwell, is indeed a lighted candle. Know thou her worth. That maid servant of God shall shine forth in the spiritual gatherings in such wise as to surpass the fame of Mary Magdalene and Saint Barbara. The lamp of the love of God is in truth aglow and will be the cause of thy glory in this world and in the kingdom above. This gift is now hidden and invisible, like unto the flame in the oil, but ere long it will turn ablaze. At that time thou shouldst render at every moment 1,000 thanks for having had such a distinguished wife, who was the cause of thy guidance and carried thee away from this fleeting world to the realm of the kingdom. In brief, I do love thee very much, for thou hast become the cause of the happiness of the heart of the maidservant of God, and has gladdened her heart and rejoiced her spirit. Appreciate thou her true worth, and at every moment offer thy praise, thanksgiving, and supplication at the threshold of oneness. What a letter. Now, so finally, the request for them both going to pilgrimage was given. And yeah, so they went to pilgrimage in 1909. Remember, Abdu'l-Baha came to Canada in 1912. So I'm going to skip. He writes a letter about their trip because he was in such one of these transcontinental boats, and he was telling her that it was like a universe. He was not talking to her about the faith or anything, just to please his mother. So they were accompanied by Louise Schapfer, who was to become the wife of Mr. Bosch, became Louise Bosch. And they paid her way to the Holy Land. So they stayed for 6 days as guests of Abdu'l-Baha. And one day at a table, Sutherland said to Abdu'l-Baha, says, the Christians worship God through Christ. My wife worships God through you, but I worship him directly. Abdu'l-Baha smiled and said, where is he? Why, God is everywhere, replied Sutherland. Everywhere, Abdu'l-Baha said, is nowhere, said Abdu'l-Baha. He then went on to demonstrate that such worship was worship to a figment of the imagination and had no reality. We must worship God through something tangible and real to us, hence the role of the manifestations. Sutherland bowed his head in acceptance. The real seed of his faith germinated from that hour. Now remember, we are talking about a future hand of the cause. That's his story. So they were staying at the master's house. And so years later, she tells a story that's very, very important to remember. This she wrote in 1930. She says, despite all natural reserve and the great awe I feel in approaching you in such a matter, she's writing it to her daughter. Yet my heart and conscience so urge me to trust and confide in you that it must obey. It is, after all, like so many of the strange and wonderful acts of the Master, utterly simple, born of his infinite love, mercy, and divine compassion. Mary is now on the eve of her 20th birthday, and about 21 years ago, my dear husband and I, who had been married 7 years and were childless, made the pilgrimage to the holy presence at the shrines. We were there only a few days, and one evening, in the twilight, with a white veil the beloved had wrapped around my head and shoulders, I had the little babe of Ruha Khanum in my arms. This is Abdu'l-Baha's daughter. The youngest daughter of Abdu'l-Baha, Ruha.
Was she holding the guardian then?
Sorry?
Was it the guardian, the baby she was holding?
The baby of Ruha, the daughter of Abdu'l-Baha.
Yeah. Shoghi Effendi is the grandson of Abdu'l-Baha.
Oh, if I don't think I don't think that was Shoghi Effendi. Shoghi Effendi was the son of the older daughter of Abdu'l-Baha, I think. This is the youngest one. So I had the little babe of Ruha Khanum in my arms. As I passed the master's door on my way to show the child to my husband, I saw in the gathering darkness the blessed form standing at his threshold, and he called to me in a clear, tender voice and monitored me to come. Ruha was by my side, and the master said, "You like the baby? You like that baby? I will give him to you. But he belongs to Ruha Khanum." And she replied, "If our Lord gives him to you, he is yours." Then I told the master that twice I had the opportunity to adopt lovely children, but my husband would not. With that swift motion combined of love and action, the master bade me enter his room, and setting all the waves of life in motion by his talk, by his walk, he asked me if I would like to have a child. If I knew why I had never had a child, if I wanted one now. I weep with joy and wonder as I recall the caressing, penetrating tones of his voice and the light of his glance, the mysterious, all-enveloping potency of his eternal spirit. I told him I could not have children, but I was content in the will of God. In ringing tones, he said, "This is not true. You can have children." Then suddenly, half laughing, half eager, yet with underlying gravity, he said, "Do you want a child? Shall I give you a child?" I replied, "Whatsoever you desire for me." This is all I wish. In a moment, I found myself, babe and all, clasped in his holy arms. His hands passed tenderly over my head. He said, "That is the reply of my own daughter. Be assured, be happy. I will pray for you." So that was it. That's what happened. Now, they left the Holy Land, and I think she went to Paris for a few months, and he went back to Canada. She met with Hippolyte Dreyfus, and a lot of things happened, like this is before I give you the news of what happened to her wish to have a child. Sarah Farmer, who had wanted a cabin to be built in Greenacre, asked Sutherland to help build it for her, and so on and so forth. That was the time also when they were trying to build the temple in Wilmette, and as an architect, he was competing also for that for the design. Of course, he didn't get the design accepted. Louis Bourgeois from Canada got the design accepted, but they say Abdu'l-Baha and Shawki Effendi, they preferred his design, but that was the decision of the. Anyway, so she came back from Paris, but she was given a task to do in Paris by Abdu'l-Baha before she went back. The point is that she was pregnant. That's the good news. And she didn't tell anybody. She basically, I guess, informed her husband and her father. And then on August 8th, the news flashed out all over the Baha'i world, basically, that May Maxwell had a daughter. And Abdu'l-Baha wrote her. It says 9th of April, 9th September. No. The letter of 9th April has arrived, and its contents attest to the attraction and joy of the hearts and souls. Thanks to God, the great wish to have a child hath been granted, and what thou didst ask hath been realized. Now, and that's the beautiful picture. This is the picture of May Maxwell and her daughter when she was a baby. It's a beautiful picture. You see it? She had given that picture to Agnes Alexander. So she had a child. She had to have somebody with take care of the baby, to nurse him, and she was, you know, she was beginning to now start being more active in terms of teaching. She started teaching the wife, the future wife of one of her husband's cousin, and she had to give a talk, an amazing talk in front of like maybe hundreds of people, of men mostly. And she says, I never once gave up hope that God would heal me in time and get me somehow to the whole, and then himself speak to the people. So she was becoming, you know, very strong, and was inspired to speak and teach the faith. And he was more and more getting involved in outside of his work in all kinds of services, and aside from all the architectural organizations and all the stuff that he was into and all the buildings he was doing, he was beginning to serve the faith and be in the local assembly. So this is all before Abdu'l-Baha decided to come and visit America and Canada. So Abdu'l-Baha says, I will be coming. And he wrote to her from Egypt, and finally he arrived and came to Canada. And when he came to Canada, her husband was not sure that Abdu'l-Baha could really be comfortable in their home, because, you know, he looked at the bedrooms and he didn't think that it was, you know, was very good. He would prefer to have him in the hotel. Now, that sort of, you know, kind of disappointed her so much, because she wanted Abdu'l-Baha to be in her house. So, so when Abdu'l-Baha consented to come to Montreal and the arrangements were being made, Ruhiya Khanum writes, my father explained to mother that though he would, of course, be their guest, he did not want to have the master in his home, but would engage a suite for him at the Windsor Hotel. All his sensitive Scots reticence shrank from the publicity and limelight that would be thrown on him as the host of such an attention-attracting guest as the Persian prophet and his entourage would constitute. Mother was heartbroken, but she did not remonstrate, realizing perhaps that such things cannot be debated, but must arise from the heart. The day before the scheduled arrival of Abdu'l-Baha, my father rushed into mother's room, the largest bedroom, facing the garden and possessing 3 bay windows, and looking critically at her furniture, declared, this is not good enough for Abdu'l-Baha. I'm going right down to Morgan's to buy a new set, and rushed off and immediately purchased and had delivered a bed, dressing table, and chairs in white painted Louis XV style. One can only imagine how great was her joy that her husband, of his own accord, should have felt the longing to have the master under his own roof. He himself met the master at the train station and begged him to accept the hospitality of his home. Abdu'l-Baha stayed 3 days. Then he went to the hotel because there were so many people coming and you couldn't work on it. Well, so when he came, I don't know in whose memoirs this is written. This, he said, this is my home. All that is in it is mine. Turning with an ineffable look, he continued, you are mine, your husband and child. This is my home. No wonder that it has become a Baha'i sacred place in Canada. So, now, that little girl was quite a girl, you know. She said, one day the master in the drawing room caught little Mary. Mary is, of course, Rhea Khanum, right? Mary caught little Mary up in his arms and tried to kiss her. I said, try it advisedly, for he did not succeed as the small, strong, chubby, and highly independent infant, and gave him such a slap on the face that the shock knocked the turban off his head. Then began a mad chase around the drawing room in which the master pursued the elusive and indignant child. Mother always said at that moment she could have gladly killed me. She managed to say, "Oh, Abdu'l-Baha, she is very naughty. What shall I do to punish her?" By this time, the master had succeeded in catching her and kissing me. "Leave her alone," he said. "She is the essence of sweetness."
The essence of?
She is the essence of sweetness. Did he know that she was going to become the wife of